The crackling sound from the midnight radio echoed off the walls of the dimly lit strategy room in the presidential palace in Ouagadougou, freezing the blood in Captain Ibrahim Traoré's veins. The voice was coming from the front lines, weary, desperate, yet incredibly urgent. Eagle to the nest. I repeat, eagle to the nest. Cobra is down. Cobra is down. This was far more than a military code. It was the cold herald of a steel dagger about to be plunged into the heart of the nation. The Cobra Special Forces Unit, personally trained by Traoré, was the backbone of the fight against terror. Their fall was not just a military defeat, it meant the breaking point of the national will. The map of the Sahel on the table was littered with red pins. Each one represented a village, a town, a vital artery under the control of terror groups linked to Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Nearly half the country lay under the shadow of this modern-day plague. But this latest news was different. The location where the Cobra unit was ambushed was a point that shouldn't have been on the map. It was, in theory, a secure zone under the government's full control. This was impossible. Either the maps were lying, or among the hands that drew the maps, within the palace walls, one was committing treason. Traoré was only 34 years old. On his shoulders rested the fate of a nation, and in his eyes, the weariness of 1,000 years. He had studied geology. He knew the earth, the rocks. But now he was forced to learn the darkest layers of the human soul, the geology of betrayal. Thus he maintained his composure. That calmness had been his sanctuary even in the fiercest storms. Without taking his eyes off the map, he spoke. His voice carried the precision of a surgeon holding a scalpel rather than a commander. "Get me intelligence, Chief Colonel Sis, immediately, and tell the Minister of Defense all leave is cancelled. No one leaves the palace until further notice." The room instantly buzzed with activity. As officers grabbed phones, Traoré walked to the window. The lights of Ouagadougou sparkled in the dark night like a sea of hope, but he could see the dangerous currents flowing beneath that sea. This was not just a terrorist attack. It was the first gust of a much larger, much more organized storm, and the scent in this wind was not of gunpowder, but of an expensive French perfume. What he did not yet know was that the bullets that had ambushed the Cobra unit carried the fingerprints not only of terrorists, but also of a former colonial power that had sworn to bring him down. Hold on, don't miss this detail. The point where the ambush occurred was just 10 kilometers from one of the country's richest yet untapped gold mines. The very mine that the French mining giant La Géniale d'Or had been lobbying for years to get a license for, only to be rejected by Traoré, who declared our people's gold will be processed by our people. Could this be a coincidence? For Traoré, coincidence was the name fate gave to laziness. Colonel Sis's voice on the phone was worried. "Mr. President, we have 3 survivors from the Cobra unit. They are in no condition to speak, but one of them is holding something he took from a dead terrorist." Traoré's brow furrowed. "What is it?" Sis's voice dropped to a whisper. "A state-of-the-art satellite phone, sir. And the SIM card inside, it's registered to a diplomatic line in Paris." At that moment, the red dots on the map merged to form a single word: war. But this was a war to be won not just with rifles but with betrayal, lies, and international intrigue. Traoré returned to his desk. He adjusted his red beret. The spirit of Thomas Sankara was with him in that room. And that night, the young captain swore to hunt not only the terrorists, but also the ghosts trying to steal his country's soul. When the door knocked at that moment, the news brought by the person entering would change everything forever. The person who entered was Amadou, one of Traoré's most trusted young lieutenants. His face was pale as a sheet, his hands trembling as he held out a tablet. "Mr. President," from the palace security cameras, just before midnight tonight. Traoré took the tablet. On the screen was the grainy image of a rarely used service corridor in the palace's west wing. 2 shadows appeared. One was the Minister of Defense, General Diarra, one of the country's most experienced and respected soldiers. The other was Traoré's breath caught in his throat. The other was the French ambassador to Ouagadougou, Jean-Pierre Dubois, What could they possibly be doing in a hidden corridor at that hour of the night? There was no sound, but their body language said it all. General Diarra was explaining something with an anxious and agitated air, while Dubois was trying to calm him, touching his shoulder. Then the ambassador slipped a small, thick envelope into the general's hand. This was more than a moment of bribery. It was the moment a nation's honor was being sold to a foreign power by a man in uniform. Traoré replayed the footage. He watched it again and again. The image of betrayal, rendered in digital pixels, was frozen before his eyes. It was right at that moment that everything changed. Traoré understood that he now had to fight not only the enemy outside but also the snakes within. General Diarra was one of only 3 people who knew all of the Cobra unit's operational plans, all their secret frequencies. The other 2 were himself and Intelligence Chief C. The equation was simple. The information that led to the ambush had been leaked from this room, from this palace. Lieutenant Traoré said, the steel-cold tone in his voice startling Amadou. Summon General Diarra to my office immediately. But do not say a word. Just say I need to see him urgently. And Amadou, from now on, don't even trust your own father. Amadou nodded and quickly left the room. Traoré sat at his desk. He had 2 options: either arrest the general immediately and risk a civil war, or use him as bait to find out how deep the conspiracy went. The young leader chose the second path. This was a game of chess, and he was prepared to sacrifice his queen, if necessary, to protect his king. A few minutes later, General Diarra entered the room. He wore a mask of feigned concern. Mr. President, you summoned me. What happened to the Cobra unit is terrible. We must launch a counter-operation at once. Traoré motioned for him to sit. He was calm. Looking straight into his eyes, he said, General, the counter-operation has already begun, but this operation will be conducted not in the desert, but here, in the corridors of this palace. The expression on the general's face froze for an instant. A flicker of panic appeared and vanished in his eyes. I don't understand, Mr. President. Traoré slowly slid the tablet across the desk. I hope you understand this, General. When Diarra saw the moment of his own treason on the screen, his color drained. He swallowed hard. Years of experience had vanished in that instant. This is a conspiracy, Mr. President. It's a fabrication. The French framed me. Traoré smiled, but it was not a warm smile. I know, General. They framed you. And now, I will give you a chance to get out of that frame, or you will suffocate in it. The choice is yours. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. Traoré's plan was simple. General Diarra would continue to cooperate with the French. But now he would be Traoré's agent, not theirs. He would leak information that Traoré was unaware of the Cobra ambush, that he was panicking and preparing to move a large military force to the north of the country. This was a fake plan designed to leave the capital vulnerable. The real goal was to make the conspirators reveal themselves completely. General Diarra had no other choice. He agreed to pay the price for his betrayal with a second betrayal. Very well, he said in a shaky voice. What do you want me to do? Traoré handed him a new map. You will meet with Ambassador Dubois tomorrow morning. You will tell him that the capital's defenses are weakened and that everything is ready for Operation Golden Vulture. Operation Golden Vulture? The general asked, surprised. What's that? Traoré's eyes glinted. That, General, is the bait your French friends are going to swallow. And on the hook of that bait is not just you, but all the enemies of Burkina Faso. As General Diarra left the room, Traoré knew the game had begun. But at the end of this game, either Burkina Faso would stand as an independent nation, or it would become an appetizer on the table of modern colonialism's jackals. When the phone rang, the fact that it was the president of Mali on the line would once again change the course of the game. The voice on the phone belonged to Colonel Assimi Goïta, the transitional president of Mali. His voice was clear and resolute. Brother Ibrahim, I have received the news. I wanted you to know that you are not alone. The heart of the Sahel beats with you. This phone call was not a mere condolence of protocol. It was the confirmation of an unbreakable bond forged between the leaders of three nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, who shared a common destiny and sought to break free from the same colonial shackles. Within hours, General Abdurrahmane Chayani, the leader of Niger, was also on the line. The three leaders held a meeting that would alter the course of history over a secure video conference line. Traoré explained the betrayal in the palace and the trap set by the French. He presented the evidence. The reaction of the other two leaders was one of anger and determination, because they knew that the fire burning in Ouagadougou today could engulf Bamako and Niamey tomorrow. Their struggle was not separate. It was Traoré connected the pieces, the Cobra ambush, the traitor General Diarra in the palace, the plan to leave the capital vulnerable, and now, an intervention force waiting in Côte d'Ivoire. Their plan was diabolical. They would first create chaos from within through terror and betrayal, then, under the pretext of restoring stability and protecting the legitimate government, they would bring in their mercenaries and puppets to seize power. This was the most modern, most despicable version of colonialism. When will they move? Traoré asked. Goïta's answer was blood-chilling. According to our intelligence, they are waiting for the code name Golden Vulture. At that moment, the fake operation code name Traoré had given General Diarra to invent had turned into a terrifying reality. The enemy was not one step ahead of him. They were inside his mind. But they had not counted on one thing, that Traoré was no longer alone. You won't believe this, but the three leaders devised a joint counter-operation plan that very night. The plan was named Sankara's Spirit. According to the plan, General Diarra would send the message to the French that Operation Golden Vulture had begun. When the French-backed terrorists and mercenaries moved towards the capital, a massive ambush would be waiting for them in the desert. But this ambush would not be carried out by the Burkinabe army alone, but with the participation of Malian and Nigerian special forces attacking simultaneously from three different directions. This would be the first operation of the joint Sahel Army. As Traoré ended the conference, he thanked his allies. Today, he said, Africans have begun to write the destiny of Africa. This is not just a war, this is our declaration of independence. But to write this declaration, more blood would have to be shed, because the enemy was not only on the outside but was also hiding inside, in the most unexpected places. As security officers approached with what they found during a search of one of Traoré's closest bodyguards' rooms, the true depth of the conspiracy would be painfully revealed. This was the greatest test of his leadership. He could have given in to his anger and had Diallo executed on the spot. But he, like Thomas Sankara, believed that justice was greater than personal revenge. "Bring me Diallo," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "But let no one suspect anything. Say I want him for a routine security briefing." A few minutes later, Captain Diallo entered the room with his usual confident demeanor. "Your orders, Mr. President." Traoré pushed the bag across the desk towards him. "What is this, Captain?" The moment Diallo saw the bag, he froze. His color drained. His confidence evaporated in an instant. He stammered, I can explain, Mr. President." Traoré stood up. He did not raise his voice, but every molecule in the room seemed to be crushed under the weight of his fury. "Explain what, Diallo? For how much you sold out your brothers? For what promises you stabbed your homeland in the back? The blood of those soldiers from the Cobra unit is on your hands too. Tell me, what will you explain?" "What you see now is nothing." Captain Diallo fell to his knees. In tears, he confessed everything. The French had taken his sick daughter, who was receiving treatment in Paris, hostage. They had threatened that her treatment would be terminated if he did not cooperate. They had tasked him with reporting Traoré's every move, every meeting. He was the second and most important mole in the palace, after General Diarra. As Traoré listened to this confession, his anger gave way to a deep sadness. This was the most ruthless face of colonialism. They turned people into monsters by exploiting their most sacred vulnerabilities. Their families, their children. "How is your daughter?" Traoré asked. This was a question Diallo had not expected. Not well, Mr. President. If they don't send her medicine. Traoré turned to Colonel C. Colonel, contact the Turkish and Russian embassies, immediately. Explain the situation. Arrange for Captain Diallo's daughter to be taken from Paris and treated in the best hospital in Ankara or Moscow. Our state will cover all expenses. That is an order. Captain Diallo could not lift his head from the floor. The man he had betrayed was now saving his daughter's life. This was a lesson greater than forgiveness. It was a reminder of what it means to be human. Now get up, Captain, said Traoré. Stop crying. You will pay the price for your betrayal to your country by serving this country once again. You are my agent now. You will tell the French that everything is proceeding as planned, that my trap is working perfectly. We are going to prepare the biggest surprise of their lives for them. Captain Diallo rose to his feet, tears in his eyes. From that moment on, his loyalty was no longer forged by fear, but by gratitude and honor. Traoré had managed to turn the greatest betrayal into the most powerful weapon. But there were only hours left until the operation began, and the desert was preparing to swallow blood. As Traoré walked towards the operations center, he knew that when the sun rose tomorrow, the sands of the Sahel would be watered with the blood of either traitors or heroes. When he answered that phone, the news from the front would give the first result of this bloody equation. Operation Sankara's spirit began in the darkest hour of the night. With trembling fingers, General Diarra sent the coded message from his satellite phone. The Golden Vulture has taken flight. This was met with cries of victory at the DGSE headquarters in Paris and at the mercenary camp in Côte d'Ivoire. For them, the game was over. Traoré had fallen into the trap. The capital was left defenseless. Hundreds of terrorists began advancing on the capital from 3 directions. Simultaneously, 2 cargo planes with civilian aid organization emblems, taking off from Côte d'Ivoire, began transporting the mercenaries under the guise of a stabilization force. Everything was proceeding according to their plan. Or so they thought. What they did not know was that their every step, every phone call, was being monitored in real time by the joint intelligence network of 3 nations. What they did not know was that the prey they thought they were hunting was, in fact, the hunter. Ibrahim Traoré was not in the crisis center in the capital. With his red beret and military camouflage, he was on the front line in the Valley of the Jackals near the city of Djibo, where the heart of the operation would beat. Beside him were his loyal soldiers and the Volunteers for the Defense of the Homeland, VDPs. These volunteers were farmers, teachers, shopkeepers. The old model Kalashnikovs in their hands may have been rusty, but the love for their country in their hearts was like steel. Traoré was one of them, more a comrade than a leader. He lay on the ground with them, drank from the same canteen. "Are you afraid?" he asked a young volunteer next to him. The boy had just turned 18. "Yes, Captain," he said honestly. "But with you by our side, I am stronger than my fear." Traoré touched the boy's shoulder. "Fear is normal. But remember, this land is ours. This land was watered with the blood of our ancestors. And tonight, not a single traitor's boot will step on this soil. This is my promise to you." Hold on, don't miss this detail. The ambush Traoré had set was the kind that would be written about in military textbooks. He had lured the terrorist convoy into a narrow valley. Both slopes of the valley were held by Burkinabe soldiers and VDPs. But the real surprise was at the valley's exit. There, waiting silently in the dark of the night, were the most elite special forces units of Mali and Niger, the Touré Ghosts, and the Desert Lions. This was a unified Sahel army. The enemy was advancing right into a perfect death trap. Colonel Sissa's voice came over the crackling radio. "Mr. President, the convoy has entered the valley. 3 kilometers, 2 kilometers, 1 kilometer, they are in position." Traoré watched through his night vision binoculars as the pickups and armored vehicles carrying hundreds of militants poured into the valley. Everything was ready. The entire Sahel held its breath. Traoré took the radio. His voice was like a lightning bolt tearing through the desert's 1,000-year silence. "To all units, fire." In that instant, the Valley of the Jackals turned into hell. Hundreds of rockets, mortar shells, and bullets rained down from the valley slopes. The stunned terrorists could not understand what hit them. Their vehicles turned into fireballs one by one, and they scattered in panic. While victory was being won in the Valley of the Jackals, the second act of the war was beginning in the capital, Ouagadougou. The two cargo planes from Côte d'Ivoire carrying French mercenaries had contacted the airport control tower. The pilot's voice was confident. "Ouagadougou Tower, this is Peace Dove Cargo 1-2. Due to the instability in your country, at the request of the French government and with the approval of General Diarra, we are bringing humanitarian aid supplies and security advisors. We request permission to land." This was a declaration of invasion, spoken in the polite language of international law. The controller in the tower responded as instructed. "Peace Dove, understood. Stand by for landing." The pilots thought this was a routine procedure, but what they did not know was that the airport was at that very moment surrounded by the most elite units loyal to Traoré. Explosives, laid weeks in advance under the runway, were waiting for a command. All diplomatic channels had been shut down, and Burkina Faso's airspace was closed to all flights. Those two planes were trapped in the sky. Traoré had returned to the capital from the Valley of the Jackals by helicopter. He went straight to the control tower. He took the radio. His voice was no longer that of a captain, but of the leader of a sovereign nation. "Peace Dove Cargo, this is Captain Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. I am here to tell you that I know who you are and what your true purpose is. Your planes are carrying not humanitarian aid, but mercenaries who have come to spill blood in my country. General Diarra's approval is no longer valid, as he is currently under arrest for high treason." A chilling silence fell in the cockpits of the planes. Their plan was exposed. They were caught. The pilot stammered a reply. "Mr. President, this is a misunderstanding." Traoré cut him off. "The only misunderstanding is that you still think Africa is in the 19th century. I now offer you two choices. Either you immediately turn back and return to where you came from, or you will pay the price for violating the airspace of Burkina Faso. You have 5 minutes to decide." This was not a bluff. Traoré's finger was on the button that would activate the air defense systems. Those 5 minutes were the longest 5 minutes of those mercenaries' lives. They desperately tried to contact their headquarters in Paris and Côte d'Ivoire, but it was futile. Burkina Faso had jammed all communication networks. They were alone. When the time was up, Traoré spoke again. "Your time is up." Just then, the pilot of one of the planes, in a panic, made a sudden maneuver and tried to descend for a forced landing on the runway. It was the last mistake they would ever make. Traoré gave the order, "Destroy the runway." A button was pushed, and the explosives planted in the middle of the runway detonated with a massive roar. A giant crater opened up on the tarmac. Just when they thought it was over, Traoré had one last thing to say to the world. That evening he stood before the international press. Beside him were the handcuffed General Diarra and Captain Diallo. On the giant screen behind him, footage from the battle in the Valley of the Jackals, the crashed plane, the captured French-made weapons, and documents found on the dead terrorists were displayed. Traoré held up a satellite phone. It was the phone registered to Paris, found on the terrorist who had ambushed the Cobra unit. "Tonight," said Traoré, his voice echoing around the globe, "a vile attack and coup attempt against our country, supported by foreign powers, has been repelled. This phone is proof of who is behind this attack. We will no longer be silent. We will no longer accept being slaves in our own land. Today, not just Burkina Faso, but all of Africa has risen. I am speaking to France and to all colonialist mentalities. Withdraw your soldiers, your spies, your companies from our land. This is not a request, it is an ultimatum." That speech marked the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. Ibrahim Traoré was no longer just the leader of Burkina Faso. He was the living symbol of Africa's honor and its struggle for independence. And the fire of this struggle had just been lit, ready to engulf the entire continent. The voice on the phone was familiar, but this time it was not an ally calling, but the Secretary General of the United Nations, summoning Traoré to an urgent meeting. The world had to listen to this young leader.